A lot of modern television shows primarily feature non-traditionally masculine male characters. These are male leads that break the mold for how a man is supposed to be and act. And while shows like The Boys and Ted Lasso are fun to watch, sometimes it's also nice to have a traditionally manly male lead, as long as it keeps it interesting. And that's where Peacemaker comes in. This show fills the niche of the strong masculine male character quite well. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that the show is a celebration of modern masculinity, and it does this through its portrayal of different kinds of male characters, and even some female ones. In this video, we'll be diving into how James Gunn's Peacemaker not only deconstructs, but also celebrates modern masculinity. And of course, to do that, we will have to be discussing the show in depth, so spoilers if you haven't already watched the show or haven't caught up yet. And with that, let's talk about strength, composure, and integrity. These are traits often associated with the idea of manliness. When people picture the ideal man, they tend to picture one with these characteristics, specifically someone who is strong in both physique and character, someone calm in the face of danger and doubt, and someone who is a paragon of moral righteousness. And Peacemaker, at the start of the series, has all of these things, at least on paper. I mean, think about it. Peacemaker is a master at hand-to-hand combat with an arsenal of powerful helmets and weaponry that he is well versed in utilizing. He also boasts an incredibly muscular physique. And when I say boasts about it, I mean he really does. He faced down a giant alien monster and lived, and finally, he took a vow to preserve peace. So at his core, he at least means well. And that's what makes Peacemaker such an interesting character. He has all the typical ingredients to be the perfect man, but at the start of the show, he is the furthest thing from it. In fact, in universe, he's considered a joke. People think of him as a lunatic, a clown, a deranged criminal masquerading as a wannabe hero. And that's part of the beauty of this character. In spite of having all the pieces to be the perfect man, upon closer inspection, he has a lot to learn. He objectifies women. He's inconsiderate to the insecurities and feelings of others. He pushes people away, and generally, he's just a bit of a dick. And the show goes out of its way to portray that he acts like this because of his upbringing. Peacemaker's primary parent figure growing up was his father, a supervillain and white supremacist, not exactly a paragon of chivalry. Thus, Peacemaker's arc in season 1 is actually that of unlearning. It's him realizing that the definition of being a man that he had growing up was actually closer to being a bully, and he has to figure out how to grow from it while preserving his best aspects. And this reflects a lot of men's experience because of how they were raised. They think that throwing insults and being a dick equals building camaraderie, when really this isn't the case in the majority of circles, especially mixed gender ones. And this is actually something that I, a young man, personally related to as well. I spent my high school years in an all-boys environment, and I developed habits and a manner of speaking that didn't translate well when I got to college. Like Peacemaker, I was mean to others, thinking it was funny and never inappropriate, a behavior that I had to unlearn as I matured. But I never wanted to hurt people, and Peacemaker didn't either. It's just his primary parent figure was a horrible, horrible person, a white supremacist, a supervillain, and an abusive, narcissistic parent. Thus, we can see why Chris became the way he was. And as the series goes on, we see that Peacemaker's behavior towards his colleagues changes. He learns that being mean isn't the best way to build brotherhood, and that you shouldn't make fun of people's insecurities, especially those who you work with, because we all have them, and it just wouldn't be right to. Instead, he learns to bond with his colleagues over music, shared experiences, and their adventures together. It's only when Peacemaker stops calling John Diebeard that they actually become friends and they truly form the 11th Street Kids. And then there's his journey with his emotions. A lot of men are raised to never show emotion to others, besides maybe anger. And we see that Peacemaker adheres to this belief early on as well. We see that he's overwhelmed by the events of the show so far that he just lies down in his trailer and cries, but when Vigilante drops by and notices this, he immediately stops and denies that he was even crying. He's afraid to show emotion because he wrongfully equates emotion with weakness, but that's never been the case because emotion is human and it's what allows us to connect to other people. By the finale, Peacemaker learns that it's okay to be vulnerable around the people that you love. It's okay to trust and let your guard down and show your emotional tenderness. The people who matter most shouldn't judge you harshly for it, and if they do, fuck them. We see that Peacemaker breaks down again after he just shot his father in the forehead. He falls to his knees and cries in front of Economos and Vigilante. And who wouldn't cry in that scenario? You just killed an evil, racist murderer who also happened to be your father, the man who raised you and took you in when you had nothing. It's obvious that Peacemaker had some complicated feelings towards his dad, and understandable that he would want to cry after doing what he did. To not feel anything in that situation would be inhuman. And finally, there's his vow of peace. It's a well-intentioned vow, don't get me wrong, because peace is ultimately good, but he also said, and we're constantly reminded of this, that he would have killed anyone to achieve peace, including women and children. In his debut, the Suicide Squad film, he kills Rick Flag Jr. under Amanda Waller's orders in the name of peace, but Flag was a good man and was well-intentioned. But Peacemaker killing him means that he's got a good man's blood on his hands. Does that make him a hero or a villain? So Peacemaker starts to question and think. He doesn't want to be a pawn who blindly follows orders. He questions Myrn, refuses to assassinate children, and ultimately challenges the people around him for answers. We see Peacemaker grow to be a critical thinker. Chris learns to understand that real integrity doesn't mean blindly following orders, but doing what's right, even if it means defying them. And he's learned that peace doesn't have to mean submission. By the finale, Peacemaker is still strong, but he's learned to use that strength to lift others up. He's still composed, but instead of hiding his emotions, he's also learned to be vulnerable to his friends, and most importantly, he's learned what it truly means to be good. And Peacemaker, by the end of Season 1, is no less manly than he was at the beginning. But he is definitely a better man than who he was before, showing men that it's okay to be a work in progress. After all, great things take time to build. But even if the show is ultimately about Peacemaker, the show wouldn't be what it is without the other characters in the cast, especially one of my personal favorites, Vigilante. Vig is a weird character, and I mean that literally. This iteration of Vigilante is a skilled fighter, being adept at hand-to-hand combat, bladed weaponry, and firearms. His costume makes him look mysterious and dangerous, a threat not to be messed with, giving the imagery of characters like Boba Fett, Judge Dredd, and even Black Noir. But when he opens his mouth, that all goes away, because this Vigilante is a complete dork. Yeah, he's a bona fide killer, but he's also a lanky, awkward 20-something that lives with his mom. He's obsessed with being Peacemaker's best friend, and he doesn't get certain social cues since his mind seemingly operates on a different wavelength. But nobody bullies Vig for being different. Everyone just accepts that he's just the way he is, because some people just happen to think differently from the rest. But that doesn't make him any less of a man. Yeah, he's weird, but he can still throw hands, shoot guns, and swing a blade just as good as the rest of them. In that same vein, John Economos has his moments too. Yes, he along with Leota are probably the most grounded characters on the show, and as a result, he can seem like less of a man than someone like Peacemaker or Vigilante. Economos is, of course, awkward, anxious, cowardly, insecure, and dislikes getting his hands dirty. But a measure of a man is in his deeds, and when it comes down to it, Economos always gets the job done. He stops Judo Master from escaping and alerting the rest of the butterflies. He chainsaws a gorilla that's about to kill his friends, and he's the one who drops off the sonic boom helmet in the infested barn. Yeah, sure, he complained a lot and wasn't really cut out for the line of work that he was in, but he's a Samwise Gamgee type character. Way in over his head, but because of his friends and sense of duty, still finds a way to get the job done. And I don't care who you are, but that's manly and worth celebrating. Another character that I want to highlight is Harcourt. She celebrates masculinity by showing that women can embody the best aspects of being masculine too. Because Harcourt is hardcore. She takes nobody's shit and is a goddamn fighter. In her free time, she can throw hands with men twice her size. On the field, she's an effective shot caller, making tough decisions that other characters like Leota and Economos won't. She is also highly respected by her peers for her strength of character. And that's why when Myrn's exterminated, Harcourt is easily the best person to be leading the team. Harcourt's character shows that women can be strong fighters, decisive leaders, and genuinely good friends. Because she shows that masculinity and being a woman aren't mutually exclusive. But the show doesn't end there when it comes to celebrating masculinity, because it also does so in things like its choice of scenes, dialogue, and even its meta aspects like casting and soundtrack. One of my personal favorite scenes in the show actually tackles how men deal with grief. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a scene in the show where Peacemaker is crying alone in his room, but Vigilante stops by and Chris just hides his emotions. He's not really ready to talk about them, and Vig is not the best person to process emotions with, as we can see from the pep talk they have after the scene. Instead, the scene cuts to them just shooting up a bunch of appliances with bullets, arrows, and even some dynamite. It's a scene of men just doing cool shit instead of sitting down and talking about their emotions. And while emotional processing is important, sometimes a guy just needs to blow off some steam, whether it's through sports, fishing, or just shooting some guns with the boys. This is how a lot of men have processed their emotions and dealt with depression for generations, and honestly, I think it still has a place in modern society. And speaking of this scene, another part I enjoyed about it is the background music that was playing was a rock rendition of the song Drag Me Down by One Direction. Rock has always been a genre dominated by men. While there are definitely female rock artists, the most popular ones have always been men. The Rolling Stones, Queen, Metallica. There's just something about rock music that simply appeals to the male gender. And this is something that we see in Peacemaker, with one of the bonding points between Chris and his brother Keith, and then eventually the rest of the 11th Street kids, particularly Economos and Vigilante, being rock music. And rock is a genre that's always been about challenging norms and defying convention. In episode 1, Chris talks about glam rock artists, referencing how artists like David Bowie were real men because they weren't afraid to be women. Then in episode 2, we hear a rock rendition of a song from One Direction, a boy band that a lot of people, particularly from my generation, derogatorily called gay. Rock music keeps popping up in the show, whether it's in the background playing during one of the more exhilarating fight scenes, or if it's Peacemaker playing piano during one of the most emotional moments on the show. Much like how artists like Madonna, Taylor Swift, Amy Winehouse, and Beyonce influence a lot of women through their music, men have always been influenced by rock artists. There's a reason why men absolutely love their Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin, and Nirvana. And the way the show uses rock music to appeal to its primarily male audience can be likened to how a show like The Summer I Turned Pretty, for example, uses Taylor Swift to appeal to its female audience. And speaking of a male audience, another reason why the show is such a celebration of masculinity and male culture is in its choice of lead actor. Gunn could have easily gone with a Hollywood hottie for Peacemaker, but instead, he chose a WWE superstar for the role, and his name is John Cena. And of course, he rose to fame in the hyper-masculine sphere that is pro wrestling. I'm sure a lot of fans grew up cheering for him in the ring, but Cena showed that he's more than just a wrestler. And I don't mean that just because he's transcended WWE fame by becoming a meme. I mean he showed that he has legitimate acting chops in Peacemaker and brought a level of nuance to the role that I honestly forgot who I was watching at times. And what makes it even more amazing is that Cena wasn't even Gunn's first choice for the role. Gunn originally wanted Batista, another former wrestler who famously portrayed Drax in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. But due to scheduling constraints, Cena took the role and absolutely made it his own. As Peacemaker, Cena is now once again cementing himself as a masculine icon for an entirely different audience, and I love that. But I think that by far the most interesting way the show showcases masculinity is by highlighting a very real problem that men today experience. See, the entire plot of Season 2 revolves around how Peacemaker finds an interdimensional portal to another universe, one where his life is seemingly perfect. In this alternate reality, his older brother Keith is alive and well. His father doesn't hate him and actually gives him attention, and his interdimensional counterpart has a romantic connection with Emilia Harcourt. Meanwhile, in his home dimension, everything kinda sucks. After the events of the first season. Yeah, they defeated the Butterflies, but his friends Harcourt and Adebayo are out of a job. Economos works for Argus, but is miserable under new management, and Peacemaker himself has still earned very little respect from the general public and more legitimate superheroes like the Justice Gang. He also has no living family members that we know of, and he apparently had a moment with Harcourt while they were alone together, and he keeps pushing that there was something there, but she repeatedly tells him that it meant nothing to her and denies the possibility of the two being something more. And with all of that being said, it's easy to tell that Peacemaker is lonely. He craves a love deeper than platonic friendships and his kinship with Eagly, because that's all he kind of has now. He doesn't have a family after killing his white supremacist dad and losing his brother at a young age, and he also doesn't have a girlfriend because Harcourt, the only girl he seems to be interested in, doesn't want anything romantic at the moment. He doesn't have a job because he no longer works for the government, and the Justice Gang rejected him. Peacemaker has all of this free time and energy, and nothing to pursue. And it also doesn't help that he's being haunted by the ghosts of his past. His killing Rick Flag Jr. under Waller's orders is held against him by Flag Sr. So he escapes into this beautiful, magical parallel world where he has everything he's ever wanted. But he also doesn't notice that this world has literally been taken over by Nazis. And I think Peacemaker's journey in this season is supposed to mimic what a lot of men experience in modern times. A lot of men these days can't find love, and that's a huge point of insecurity for them. For decades, people have claimed that your life isn't complete without a romantic partner, and that being in love is the best feeling in the world. And so a lot of men are hurting because they can't find that love and think that there's something wrong with them. After all, women's standards have never been higher than they are today. And that's just the truth. Women no longer need to rely on men for financial security. Thus, they won't settle for toxic, abusive men who think of them as objects. And many women will choose to stay single instead of dating a wife beater. But instead of accepting a shifting world and adapting to it, a lot of men blame women for not being attracted to them, and as a result, start adopting toxic ideologies. But ultimately, they do this because they're lost, lonely, and upset, not because they're evil. They just want to feel welcomed and loved. And Peacemaker is the same. He just wants to go to a world where the people love him, and Harcourt does too. But the truth is, Peacemaker doesn't actually love Harcourt. While the two definitely did grow a bond through their adventures together, he still pines for her and places her on a pedestal. And when she rejects him repeatedly, he runs off to another world and gets with someone who looks and sounds like her, but isn't the Harcourt he knows. Because alternate Harcourt doesn't dress like a biker and kick ass. She doesn't swear, she sits behind a desk and does nothing during a terrorist attack. And apparently, that's good enough for him. Chris is tunnel visioned on Harcourt and thinks that everything will be fine and dandy if she just dates him, but having a girlfriend wouldn't magically fix all of his problems. He even takes things a step too far, confronting Harcourt and practically giving her an ultimatum: love me or you will never see me again. And ultimatums suck for everyone, especially on the receiving end. And speaking of Harcourt, she simply isn't ready for a relationship right now. We don't know much about her past, but we do know that she's got a lot of things to work on. Emilia willingly seeks out fistfights with strangers because that's the only time she's ever feels something. That's not sexy, that's messed up in the head, and the characters need serious help before she's ready to love anyone. She's not a bad person for rejecting Peacemaker. In that same vein, men should never blame women for rejecting them. If a woman isn't ready to love you, she will tell you no, and that should be okay. Because if you're hungry, do you blame the fridge for having no food? If you're thirsty, do you blame the well for running dry? And if you crave love, do you blame those who simply can't give it to you? Of course not. And I think that's the message that Peacemaker is trying to portray to its audience this season. Men shouldn't blame women for rejecting them, but men also shouldn't be blamed for just wanting love.